Should we get started?
Good with me, yeah.
Okay. Thanks everyone for coming to this coffee chat. So this event is sponsored by Animal Law Society, Food Law Society, and Effective Altruism. Also the Dean of Students Grant Fund, and it is being filmed courtesy of the Animal Law and Policy Program. So everyone just be aware of that. We do have pastries and coffee here. I'm sorry, Pizzi's kind of messed up our order. I definitely did ask for vegan stuff. So the cookies are vegan, but the bars are not. So I do apologize for that. There's coffee here. There was also supposed to be soy milk. So there's coffee without milk is the takeaway from that. We have with us Jay Shooster, and I'll let him take it from here.
All right, well, thank you all. And yeah, I guess the first thing I want to say is the usual. I really am, though, happy to be here and meet all of you. And I'm only going to talk for not too long before hopefully we just have a conversation with folks in this small group and we can talk about, I can answer any questions that you have about anything that sounds interesting, let's say the next 5 to 10 minutes. There are some things that, so the talk is going to be recorded. That's definitely happening?
Yes.
Okay. So we'll have to have a round 2 after it's over to talk about maybe some of the details of some of the cases that I could talk about in general terms, but probably won't want to get super into the weeds for different reasons. But my background is just very briefly, I always sort of had certain utilitarian leanings. I read The Life You Can Save by Peter Singer in high school because my dad was also very much into philosophy and he shared that book with me. And so in high school and early college, I was sort of into international development was like my main focus area. But I definitely internalized a lot of the underlying principles behind Peter Singer's work. Is everyone generally familiar with Peter Singer's work? Yeah. So I internalized some of the general principles, which is just like the whole idea why we should care about people in other countries. The same amount we care about people in our own country. It's just because these are kind of arbitrary distinctions that don't actually have any moral significance. And I think that stuck with me somehow. That didn't make me an animal rights activist right away, but it did plant the seed that when I started learning about animal agriculture and how horrific it was, I started to ask those questions. I mean, what does the way that someone's body, how does the way that someone's body looks, whether you have feathers or fur or scales, what does that have to do with their moral significance? And so didn't take a whole lot to convert me. I actually started out, I never would have thought I would do animal stuff. I thought that animal stuff wasn't really important in comparison to the real serious issues like in human rights, or so I thought. But yeah, as I was persuaded enough by at least what I thought was like the torture level suffering that I'd seen in these various, Mercy for Animals videos and PETA videos, I decided to invest some time in learning about it. And at first, and this will all become relevant, I promise. At first, I didn't just become a vegan hardcore animal rights activist right away. I just decided that I didn't want to eat products that came from inhumane operations. And so I made it a mission to do my research and to only eat meat and only eat animal products from the places that I really researched and found were humane. And I was going to school in Gainesville, Florida, in the middle of farm country, where we had amazing farmers markets, all the local farmers, and I would go, actually went and asked them about their production practices. I made a little list based on the practices I saw in the PETA videos, and I just remember very vividly asking this guy, do you cut off their horns without painkillers? And besides, this is dreaming cow dairy, you can only get it at the farmer's market. And he said, yeah, we do. I don't feel good about it, but if we were going to actually give them painkillers when we were going to do these mutilations, it would increase the cost of a cup of yogurt by like a quarter, and we wouldn't do it anymore, or we'd go out of business. And I had the same experience multiple times. It was either I would get an answer like that, or I wouldn't get an answer at all, which was even more concerning. And so next thing I knew, I was just implicitly vegan because I didn't find anything that actually met my ethical standards for how animals should be treated. And that's all very relevant to what I do today. I mean, I'll just say fast forward. I went to law school. I worked in national security, mostly different internships during law school, but remained interested in animal rights. Spent a year at NYU in our Center for Human Rights and Global Justice doing national security journalism work. And then I ended up here at the Richman Law Group, where I work now. And now my full-time job is to do the very sorts of investigations and, well, now in legal work of these different factory farms or industrial producers of animal products, to basically find these companies, to put these companies' representations that you may see that their products are natural or humane or cage-free or this or that, and actually put it to the test and do research to show that that's not the case, and then we sue them under consumer protection statutes. And so my law firm is kind of unique. It's, well, I say my law firm, the Richman Law Group where I work. About a third of our practice is focused on animal protection, consumer protection, or animal rights related consumer protection work. It's almost all consumer protection. We do a little bit of civil rights litigation, suing the NYPD on the side a little bit. But for the most part, it's just consumer protection work. About, say, probably these days, yeah, about a third or 40% of our practice is focused on industrial animal agriculture, and hopefully soon some other forms of animal exploitation. And then about another, probably 60% is related to glyphosate, Roundup. You've probably seen a little bit of this litigation going on in the news, whereas a lot of the really prominent cases in the glyphosate space right now are focused on people who get, who like maybe are spraying the pesticide and get cancer. We just are working on the consumer protection side, so where products are marketed and advertised as natural, but they have residues of glyphosate in it, we will file suit under state consumer protection statutes. I do very little of that. This may be very useful to folks here. I was able to find funding for a position that was focused only on the animal ag litigation, or about 90+% focused on that, and I could talk to anyone who's interested in trying to chart their own path about how you might be able to, put yourself in that position where you could do something similar. But yeah, I only do that animal ag related litigation. We mostly sue in the most consumer protection friendly states, New York, California, and Washington, D.C. We sue on behalf of both individual consumers who buy these products and who are misled, and then we also sue on behalf of nonprofits like Animal Legal Defense Fund, and we work with a bunch of other animal rights and environmental and human health focused groups. And one of the kind of hallmarks of our work, and something I'm really excited about, is that these companies, basically it's become all the rage where no matter how big and evil you are, you'll make every claim under the sun that you are sustainable and natural and humane. And we actually have just started a new wave of litigation where we hit them on all of these fronts. And I'm really excited about that because it enables us to bring together groups. Like currently we have a lawsuit against Pilgrim's Pride, which is the second largest chicken producer in the country. And we've brought together groups like Food and Water Watch, which is really focused on the environment and human health, the Organic Consumers Association, which is really focused on consumer protection and human health, and then Animal Equality, who is co-counsel with us. So we can bring these, we call it the Trifecta of Issues, to really put the pressure on these companies on a range of dimensions, and also build a broad coalition of organizations. And we think this is effective for several reasons. One, that the more the merrier, and the more pressure we can throw on the companies, the better. But then also we think that, sadly, the reality is that even though I think in the general public people are very supportive of animal rights, to get the attention of this serious old white man who is sitting on as a judge, unfortunately disproportionately old white men, we need to try to find ways to appeal to the sensibilities of this crowd. And so we try to make sure that we are not just focused narrowly on one particular issue. And I guess, I don't want to get too deep into the weeds about how the actual mechanics of it, but when we could talk about standing issues, I know that's a big issue in this space. but I guess I'll just say generally, let me just check my notes, make sure I'm getting everything I want to. So I'll just talk very briefly about how we prove that these companies don't actually live up to their representations, and for whoever's listening to this video one day, you can, it's basically a formula. For my adversaries who want to know how we operate. Maybe I'm giving ourselves too much credit, but I go to their conferences and always try to listen to what they're saying, so maybe they're doing the same. We basically, we'll comb through all of the company's representations across, all of these different dimensions: social media, television advertising, radio, and website is a big one. And then we will engage in a range of investigations, everything from working with undercover investigators at other partner organizations, frankly finding just like publicly available information from other investigations that have already happened. And then there's a bunch of public, open source materials that the government just puts out. There's something called that EPA ECHO database where you can just kind of look up all sorts of information about Clean Water Act violations at slaughter plants, and you can find out what the demographic information of the community is, so that you can then explain to people how this is having disproportionate effects on communities of color, and you can see that they're dumping all this toxic waste, and that's just there for you online. And then we also work with, we send out tons of FOIA requests all the time on everything from animal welfare issues to pathogen testing results, to find out about whether they have multi-drug resistant pathogens in the meat supply, there are other work that we do through these public records requests at the state and the federal level. And then frankly, there's just a lot of deep Googling is what we call it, that we do, where there's just sort of tricks that you can use that that we learned from our peers in the animal advocacy space, that they found to be really useful. You can just find a ton of information kind of deeply buried within the internet by using a few little Boolean search terms, if you know what you're doing. And we've been able to find really damning information that way, that these companies don't realize is just sitting around floating on the internet somewhere, and that could reveal something that we found multiple newsworthy items about their really horrific aspects of their production practice just through this kind of online sleuthing. And then the last main component of our investigations that we do that I'm really excited about is actual chemical residue testing of the meat products, and then also of feed, if we can get our hands on it, and manure, to find out what kind of drugs are they giving these animals, or even if they're not giving to them, what kind of drugs are getting into the meat that consumers are eating. And then the last thing that I'll say before we just open it up to folks is why I think this is extremely effective as a strategy for animal advocacy. And I think it's really twofold what I'm so excited about. So forgive me if this is all, if this isn't news to any of you, but generally speaking, it's really, really hard for private citizens, so if you're not a prosecutor, it's really, really hard for you to get the issue of animal welfare into court. And there just are not legal tools available for you to do it. It can be done in certain contexts, Animal Welfare Act litigation, for example, related to animals in laboratories or zoos. But especially when you're talking about farm animals, which are obviously much, much more numerous than animals used for medical research or for entertainment, there's really, really little that anyone can do, just because there are no laws that provide a private right of action to private parties to be able to enforce these laws. There are some exceptions to that I think are really interesting and underexplored, which we can get into if anyone's really curious. But as a broad characterization, I think it's fair to say there's basically no way to get the issue of the actual treatment of animals into court. And so historically, so much of what we learn as animal welfare litigation is not actually about animal welfare. You could sue a farm for polluting, but the animal welfare issues are just tangential at best. I think a lot of the most important litigation that is happening for animals does fall into that category, but it's still a far cry from what I would like to see actually happening for animals, just because I really do think that for me, while all of these issues are important, I think that we really need to find ways to get to put these companies on trial in the court of public opinion and in the court of law for the actual treatment of the animals themselves, and have it not just be color and context that animals are abused, but actually talk about what really matters instead of finding all of these, oblique ways of trying to get at the issue. And so, yeah, if you're not a prosecutor, you're very limited. But, and there's a really big but here, there is this false advertising litigation, which actually, even though technically speaking, the core of our legal disagreement is, are you misleading consumers? If the thing that you're misleading consumers about is, are the animals in fact treated humanely, you can really get into the weeds and have an entire lawsuit that is focused on this exact question. Are these animals actually being treated humanely? And so that means that we are able to, one, just force this issue into court and actually get a judge to sit down in a jury, potentially, to listen to these arguments and learn about, in intricate detail how these companies actually operate. But then also to get discovery on these companies and to find out, we can subpoena companies for, we often say that, in the past of the animal rights movement, if you want to get information on these companies, you can do an undercover investigation of a farm. But we can basically do an undercover investigation of the boardroom. We can find out, we can force them to turn over their documents to find out not just what did this random farm worker do to hurt this pig. We can find out what is the systemic policy practices of these companies. How did they actually think it all the way up to the very top? And are they, and we can actually show that these companies, as a matter of policy, are engaging in abusive practices. And through these investigations, we've learned things that I think have really no one had any appreciation of before. I'd never heard, just as an example, until we filed this lawsuit, and this is extremely graphic, but it's important. The most common method of euthanasia that is used for chickens on factory farms, or not on period, most common method of euthanasia, the one that's standard, that is approved by the American Veterinary Medical Association, which I won't delve into, but I have a lot of unpleasant thoughts about them. The standard method is to actually, by hand, manually, just pull their heads apart from their bodies, and just you can just imagine. I mean, this is not there's so much room for human error. You have to do it exactly right, because if you pull too hard, their heads will literally pop off of their bodies. And but if you pull too soft, then you won't actually separate their, they actually involves like breaking their arteries that connect their head to the rest of their body. And if you can't actually achieve this cervical dislocation, then they will just slowly suffer to death it could be an extremely long period of time. And so it's really horrific. But I'd never heard, I've been an activist for 8 years and a very dedicated one. I never heard this before. I never knew in particular that it was just just as a matter of course, animals are decapitated and en masse on farms across the country. And we were actually able to through deposition, and I can't say which case this was in, but actually sit down and force this company to get into the details and have them look us in the eyes and say, yeah, sometimes they do end up in two pieces when we try to do this, and that's just the tip of the iceberg of the sort of information that we've been able to get that you wouldn't necessarily know. You don't have, even if you're an undercover investigator, there's some things that you're not going to see. It's actually been really hard to get investigators into actual farms where animals are raised rather than slaughterhouses. There's been more success there. But there's just so much to learn and so much we can learn through this litigation. And then we can actually just sit down for 7 hours with the head veterinarian for one of the largest meat companies in the world and just grill them and really get unprecedented access to information and get it on the record too. Not just these BS phony statements that these companies put out in response to the next investigation that comes out, but be able to ask them, to basically cross-examine them and get admissions on the record that just detail, I think, in really never before seen detail their actual practices and then their knowledge of how horrific they are. So I will stop there, but yes, suffice it to say, I think it's extremely important and groundbreaking work. actually, there's this one final thing I'll add, just to further that point, is that something that we have learned that the industry does also that I've never really heard anyone talk about before is that they now, as a matter of course, record they take video recordings of all of the slaughterhouses, and so they actually have a remote team that audits, somewhere that's not where the plants are located, a third party that by video is watching a certain subset of the footage every day. And we are able to actually ask them to turn over that footage to us. So instead of having, we don't need to send somebody in to hide and take video footage. We can literally demand that they produce the footage that they're already taking in much greater detail, 24/7 all these plants. So we really are able to put this industry under a microscope, literally and figuratively, in a way that I don't think, I'm not sure anyone really has been able to before, and I'm extremely excited about the work, and yeah, I'd love to answer any questions and chat with you all about it, or other things. Yeah.
What are like some of so when you're bringing like false advertising claims, like how is a common word that a company might say would like humanely raised or something like that, like how is that like justiciable, basically, like how do judges think about, or juries, I guess. I don't know if it's a question of law or fact. But
Yeah, it's a really good question, and with every time, there's no way of knowing in the abstract before it actually gets litigated, how the courts are going to turn on these issues. And so these companies, they claim that it's just puffery. There's the legal term that no one actually believes. This isn't actually a concrete representation that any reasonable consumer is going to take any meaning from. It's just a thing that companies say, and it's so vague that you can't possibly, hold this company liable for false advertising. And if you asked me this a few years ago, I would say, I really don't know how this is going to turn out. But actually, now we have case law, which, it's hardly a settled question. There's just not that many cases that have happened. I mean, there's like maybe 15 cases that have even touched on this issue generally, and then that actually use the word humane, where that's the key issue in the litigation. I mean, maybe there's 10 of them ever. But yeah, there are really good legal opinions out there across the country that have said, humane is an actionable representation. But it varies from word to word. So, these companies start using terms like, I don't know, responsibly raised or something like that. I don't know what they're going to do with responsibly raised. But we have some precedent that we can make the argument, but humane's one that we feel pretty good about, just because there have been enough courts that have said that humane is an actionable misrepresentation. And yeah, in multiple jurisdictions. But it really varies from word to word, and who knows what, crazy BS word they're going to come up with next, but yeah.
I wonder if you worry at all about, you say about, 90+% of your work is just doing these false advertising and otherwise consumer protection claims against, different groups within the food supply chain. Do you worry about, and no pun intended, putting all your eggs in this basket? If, say, a very bad precedent comes out, let's say the Supreme Court tomorrow says that humane is not an actionable word or something. Are you worried about, the time sunk or something like that?
Personally, I'm not too concerned by that. I mean, I think that is very much a possibility. I mean, there's about 50 ways that this field of litigation could go, kaput tomorrow. Probably not tomorrow, but soon. It could take, it could be a appellate legal decision. It could be an act of Congress. It could be act of, state government, passing all these laws that are saying, that meat needs to mean this thing, and so they could actually have, you could imagine a law that says humane is just not an actionable claim under our false protection or our consumer protection statutes. I'm not personally worried about putting my eggs in one basket personally, just even though that is the vast majority of what I do. I think I could very easily move on to a different sort of work, and I think this is a really promising line of work. And as I was saying, there's just so much, I'm learning so much every day through this work about how the industry works, that even if we never were able to do one of these cases again, I mean, just invaluable, the lessons that we're learning through the process.
So I imagine that not only you, but also probably the judges and maybe even sometimes company officials will learn quite a few things they were maybe too aware of. Maybe they had it in their subconscious mindset somewhere, but when they have to engage with this, they probably become much more aware of that. Do you think, or did you speak to judges afterwards to some degree, and did they tell you to some degree that they have changed their views on this, or like that the new information kind of influenced them, or maybe even their like company?
To judges, you said?
Judges, or even like people from companies who would then, after seeing all this evidence and engaging with it for like hours, maybe this is when they like start to actively think about it rather than using their intuition and say like, oh yeah, probably fine. But then when you're confronted with all those things, do you think that this might even change some of their opinions?
I would suspect the judges are being persuaded, but I don't know. We haven't asked them.
Yeah.
But perhaps we should, or really someone should, an academic should.
Because even if this turns out to be not successful, maybe there are some successes along the line.
Yeah, I think also just from the court of public opinion, I mean, you've had a lot of really good news coverage. In fact, later this week we're going to have a big news story coming out as well. You should keep your eyes out for it. And yeah, working with really top journalists on a variety of issues based on things we've learned here, and we probably have a big New York Times piece coming out soon that I'm really excited about. So yeah, there's a bunch of these other kind of just like social change that's happening around the litigation. In terms of the actual people at the companies, it's really, really interesting the gulf between the people who work in the production side of the businesses and the people who work in the marketing side. Because people who work on the production side, they were like born into this and they've been doing this for their whole lives, and they know how it works. They just are so disconnected from the rest of the world that they think this is like totally fine. And actually, if you go to any of these meat industry conferences, they all say, we've got a great story to tell. We just got to make sure consumers know more about it. The great story that we really have to tell about our practices and how well the animals are treated. And then, of course, the marketing department's like, yeah, I don't think so. And so that doesn't really happen. And actually, what we've seen through depositions with some of these people who work in marketing, it's like, I mean, I know one of my colleagues, I wasn't there in person for this deposition. I was just listening over the phone, but he said he thought that the person in the marketing department was like gonna cry, like learning about, through the deposition, seeing one document after another. Do you think this is humane? Do you think this is humane? And one thing I didn't mention before, I think is important to this work generally, is it's very easy to dismiss a PETA investigation as a PETA investigation, or even an MFA, Emergency for Animals, or HSUS. Oh, that's animal rights activists. Here we could literally give the news, but like, this picture, this is literally the manual from the company about how to do this horrible thing. And I think there's an extra level of like power that can put some of these issues to rest. But yeah, I think sadly, even in the case of the people who work on the marketing side in these companies, I mean, it's like what people say, it's hard to convince somebody of something if their paycheck depends on them not really understanding the issue. So I know I butchered, no pun intended, that expression, but yeah, you get the point. So I don't know exactly who it's making an impact on, but I think it's making an impact more in the general like court of public opinion.
I'm just curious whether the particular, so from what I understand, like with chicken and eggs, there's a different industry structure and there's more contract work. So often the people producing sort of on the ground level, so to speak, are not part of the same corporate umbrella as the companies producing the goods that people buy at the supermarket. So I don't know if that, have you interacted with those industries, and if so, has it presented different challenges or variables than when litigating against other adversaries in produce other animal products?
So if anything, I mean, most of the cases that I've done involve poultry components. That's what I know best.
Mm-hmm.
I can't really think about how that has played a big role in the litigation so far, like the difference between working on, pig slaughter versus chicken slaughter.
Mm-hmm.
I can't really think of how that is different, but it's definitely an extremely important issue, and it matters for kind of work that happens around our work, like when we talk about so one of the things that we've done is actually meet with some of these contract growers and poultry growers, and there's like a lot of disgruntled contract poultry growers that you can meet, and we haven't been able to find that at the same level to work with those sorts of people and get intel from those sorts of people on the pork side. So maybe that's one difference, because it is more concentrated in the pork industry, or the people who are raising the farms aren't as often, I think, owned by contractors, but I think even there you have some contractors as well. But I don't know that industry quite as well as the poultry industry. And then I can say, like in working in dairy, which is, we have a case against Ben and Jerry's right now, and that it really is such a different industry. So, and we haven't even started discovery really in that, or that's not true. We're still right in the beginning of discovery, so there's a lot to learn, and it is extremely different. So and there's definitely a learning curve, just in terms of like, who do we need to ask for the documents, and what is the, like, do they use the same sort of, how do they euthanize animals in the dairy industry? It really isn't. There's just so much to learn about all these industries. I mean, you think you've been an activist and you go to top school and you're a smart, informed person, and you really probably only know a tiny little bit about how the industry actually operates. So yeah, it's a big learning curve.
Just ask a very quick follow-up. So when you say that it's relatively easier to get information from contract growers in the poultry industry, is that pre-discovery, or you were talking about during discovery?
All
of the above,
I mean, we just generally, like, aside from our cases, we always we're just engaging in investigations, period. So yeah, I mean, during discovery, I mean, we wouldn't be able to reach out to like a company's contract growers while the lawsuit is ongoing, I don't think. So yeah, that just, I mean, as a general matter. But it could just be coincidence that we haven't found the pork producers so far. They may be out there, so disgruntled pork producers who haven't met yet, but it's been they've been less prominent, it seems.
Interesting.
Yeah, you mentioned briefly that you could tell us more about the process of suing as like a private citizen if we were interested. Could you say more about that? And also, I'm coming at this from the perspective of an undergrad rather than a law student, and so just if you could give, this might not be as useful to everyone else, but if you could give a brief explanation of what it looks like to come forward with a suit as a private citizen, that would be super helpful.
Yeah, so we're always looking for people who've actually bought these products. But one thing, just as a preliminary matter to make clear to everyone, is in the meat context, this is very tricky because preemption, which is this legal doctrine that just means that there are federal laws that govern labeling. Well, in this context, there are federal laws that govern labeling of meat products, and they expressly say in the law that no, there can't be any other standards for the labeling of meat products. So that means that we can't really go after. It's very hard to have a consumer class action case where going on behalf of consumers who are deceived, because we can't go after the label in the meat cases. In dairy and in eggs you can, just because it's weird quirks of the law, just different. But in meat cases you can't go after the label itself, and for a class action, I mean, it's just going to be very hard to identify a broad group of people that have only seen the website representations, for example, and relied on the website and not the label when they bought the products. So as an individual consumer, if you wanted to be a plaintiff in a case, it would be not impossible, but it'd be much easier in an egg or a dairy case, because we can actually go after the label itself, and everybody who buys the product sees the label. And so if you actually want to bring a case, I mean, the way that typically happens is there is some investigation. Let's say PETA does an investigation of an egg company, and actually have an egg case right now against Nellie's Free Range Eggs, which is interesting. They just filed it. Encourage people to check it out. But say, PETA does an investigation against Nellie's. They put something on social media saying look how terribly they're treated, and then you comment on their Facebook, oh my gosh, I've been buying Nellies for months because I thought that they were actually treated humanely. And then Peter's gonna say, okay, she's definitely going on our list, or they're definitely going on our list. And then they might follow up with you and say, hey, we're actually interested in bringing a class action. And so if you as an individual, it's going to be hard to like just, to just initiate something as an individual. It's not impossible, but it's like, what if you went to a law firm and were like, hey, I bought these products and I saw, but I actually don't think they're humane, but I bought them because I thought they were humane. And you need to show like you relied on the representations in these cases. They're gonna say, okay, well, like what's your proof? And yeah, if you could assemble at least a semblance of a case, it's possible you could get a firm or certainly or a nonprofit group to say, hey, we actually think that this is worth pursuing. And actually, this is one thing that I really do think people should think seriously about. Is like it is, as I was saying before, you could find out so much just through publicly available information. And so, like, I almost think like I could like, if you just gave me a company that makes these kind of claims, like if you gave me like a week, I could come back with like at least probably a decent case, false advertising case, just because they're all lying. That's the other thing. It's not just the information out there. It's just like they're all so egregiously lying about all this stuff. And so yeah, you could actually try to create a case, and the more information you can find, you could pitch me. You could say, hey, I think these people are lying, and actually I bought this product because I thought it was humane. Although that would be a tough sell to at court one day to sue if you were like literally looking for it to sue, just because again you have to show you actually bought this product because you believe that they were, as they advertised. Anyway, I don't know if that answers your question, but we can talk more in detail about it. Yeah.
One question which is like very far away from anywhere where my legal expertise lies, so if you can maybe
Sure.
give some thought on this instead. So when you say that you're fighting about how to use the word humanely, and then they might come up with different words and so on and so forth, then you might fight them again. And in Europe there were some judgments, some member states of the EU were using the word milk for almond milk, and then there were complaints because apparently milk has to do somehow with an animal, so they couldn't use the word milk to describe almond milk or soy milk or whatnot. And I was wondering on the more meta question on this whole battle for the correct words, since language in itself is developing over thousands of years, so they have kind of a built-in conservative element. Is whether this is all things considered, maybe not on an individual case basis, but all things considered, this battle for the correct words, whether that is from a progressive animal rights perspective, kind of a losing battle.
I'm sorry, I'm not in, so.
Since you try to argue for using the correct words, in some
Are
of
you
those
saying could
cases,
this actually backfire? Is that the question?
yeah, all things considered, maybe not on an individual case, but all things considered, the different cases and claims for using specific words, like in your case, I fully agree with that, right? They shouldn't call it humane.
Yeah.
But then you have other cases where they bring claims, companies bring claims against other companies saying no, you can't call this milk because a cow didn't suffer beforehand.
Yeah.
Right? And I was wondering, since there is such a conservative element built into language, that all things considered, you might go.
Okay, yeah, that is a really good question, and I'm not super concerned about it because I actually just think that the standard question in the law that is asked, the legal standard is, does a reasonable consumer think that X means Y? And so I think that I feel very comfortable saying, no reasonable consumer thinks that Miyoko's vegan cheese products came from a cow because it says in big letters, vegan, in front of it, or whatever it is, or cheese alternative. I mean, they use all of these companies are pretty good about saying, no, this is not, this is not cheese, this is not milk, or it's not milk, it's almond milk. And I just don't think that people who are buying almond milk or soy milk thinks that that came from a soy cow or an almond cow or whatever. And it's possible, but I just think, and so I'm not aware of any cases where standard false advertising laws and consumer protection laws have been successfully used against soy milk producers. And I think that's because they would be laughed out of court under that reasonable consumer standard. And so it's actually part of the litigation strategy, groups who are challenging these new laws that are coming out to say, oh no, by definition, we, the legislature in this dairy state, have decided that our poor consumers might actually think that the soy milk is from cows. So we are going to just say, we're going to declare, by fiat that it is deceptive to label it as milk. Part of the argument that groups like ALDF make is say, we already have consumer protection laws for this. Consumers are actually being deceived. Bring your claims in court like everybody else has to. Why do you get special, why do you need the legislature to define what this word means? We have the reasonable consumer standard. That's what everybody else has to do in this context. And I think that's a good argument. I think they're right. I think the consumer data bears it out that consumers don't think that soy milk comes from cows. And so that is a concern. I wouldn't say it's not a concern at all, but I do think that the benefits definitely outweigh the costs.
I think there are actually some cases in Europe where they have thought differently, which
Really?
I thought was insane, but in some states now you have to call it milk drink, like would be the literal translation. Like,
As a result of consumer
Yeah.
protection litigation, or as a result of legislatures that have decided? That
it was definitely a judgment, not a legislator. But I'm not sure about the specific reasons. But definitely
In
the
the
outcome
United
was that you,
States?
no, in Europe,
Oh, okay. Yeah.
that you have to. But their test is like the reasonable person test is super similar. But yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
it's a I think that so maybe it's more of a concern than
Yeah.
I realized. And I'm definitely open to being
I
personally.
mean, I was just as
Although
surprised.
I just think at the end of the day, I'm not sure how consumer protection law is going to be there whether we use it for animals or not.
Yeah.
The reasonable consumer standard is going to be there. Everyone for every product these laws are used. So I'm not sure about how our work necessarily. I don't see us doing a whole lot to strengthen the institution of consumer protection law just because we're such a tiny player and all of that. But yeah, I'm open to being persuaded otherwise.
Yeah, I'm interested in whether you have to make difficult decisions about settling cases as opposed to going to a full trial, because presumably you want to have the judgment
Yeah.
so that you can have the facts and so on out there, but
Yeah.
the companies always come along and go, oh, we'll fix it and
Mhm.
whatever, and let's have a private settlement agreement.
Yeah, so that's always a huge factor in these cases, and none of these cases have ever gone to trial. I'm not aware of a single humane animal welfare focused consumer protection case that has actually gone to trial. Obviously that's not unique to this type of litigation. Just in general, it's very rare. So chances are, if you have 10 cases, none of them are going to go to trial. But yeah, it's definitely still trial aside. There's a long time you could settle before that, and this is an ever-present question in the mind of the organizations and the law firm, who about when and whether to settle and what we're willing to settle for. And yeah, this has definitely played itself out in our cases where we have to ask these difficult questions, because wouldn't it be awesome to have a court just rule for once to say, yeah, that we actually found that a judge actually found that this advertising was misleading, or better yet, that this company was engaged in inhumane practices, or a jury that found this company was engaged in those practices. So yeah, it's compelling, and I think there's a lot of folks in this space that want to take these cases to trial, but these companies often are able to offer a lot to in return, where these cases are so, this is inherently risky work, just because there's very little precedent. So I think a lot of organizations might feel like, even though it'd be awesome to take this, face this case to the finish line and get a judgment, this company is maybe offering us, $1 million in legal fees, and they're going to get rid of the label, and they're going to sign on to animal welfare auditing from now on. And those things, for certain nonprofits might say, you know what, we're willing to accept that.
Would you push for them to publish like corrective advertising, or
Yeah, we always
something
seek
where
for-
they
yeah.
say, hey,
Mhm.
we told a little fib or whatever.
Yep. So yeah, that's always part of the complaints is that we see corrected advertising, and you know it comes to pass that in settlement there will be like a statement that either the plaintiff or both parties release that say, you know, I'm not aware of one where the company totally admitted fault, but they're like, hey, we were selling these products that didn't conform to our representations. We've now put this policy in place to prevent that from happening again. And they've actually, you know, we have a case, we had a case against an egg producer where they actually, you know, adopted a third-party auditing program after we discovered that their eggs were not actually pasture-raised. And so it seems like they're pasture-raised now. So yeah, there are things like that. But yeah, that's a really good question. So I could probably continue blabbing about that if you want to get into the details.
Hi, I'm wondering if you're working on the fur ban in New York City, and if so, how? And also, how could we start doing that in Boston too?
So I personally am not working on the fur ban. I know a lot of people who are working on the fur ban, and I could definitely put you in touch with them and other people who have worked on in the California fur ban now in Berkeley and San Francisco. So I can definitely connect you to folks who can tell you way more than I could about that. But yeah, I don't really have the details there. But you should definitely get it going here.
Yeah, thanks.
Are you seeing a ripple effect in the industry yet from your lawsuits? You know, are companies that you haven't sued yet, are you in your investigation, or are they, I mean, we know they're not really gonna do anything humanely, but are they shifting their language, or are they adopting so-called animal welfare practices?
You know, I don't want to give ourselves too much credit here, but it does seem that some of the companies are getting savvier. And yeah, there are certain things that they could do that are extremely misleading, but they just make it harder as a legal matter to pursue litigation. And so they can get really careful with how they say certain things, or as I said before, they can put lots of misleading claims on the labeling instead of in the other marketing, and where our hands are a lot more tied as to what we can do about it. You know, I am hesitating to reveal all of the ways that they can do it, but yeah, we can talk about that. There's a lot of disgusting, reprehensible practices that they use to continue leading consumers to believe the same things, but that give them a little bit of an out. I mean, one example that I don't think I'd be giving away any big secret on is just by having a third-party auditor and never actually going out to say that our products are humane, but just saying our products are certified humane by this company. I mean, it's a lot harder to challenge just because then we have to, I mean, they were certified humane, you know, in scare quotes, and so the company's saying, oh, we're not saying our practices are humane. We're just saying that they were certified humane by this company's standards. And that's a lot harder for us to go after, even though, I mean, it shouldn't be, but it's just the fact that it gives them extra protection to bullshit.
Okay. So you mentioned that you originally had like funding, I'm assuming philanthropic funding, to start this. Is this currently self-sustaining from legal fees, or do you think it like could be in the future?
That was the theory that I pitched my funders on. That at least it could be. Obviously, you know, no results are guaranteed in litigation. But yeah, I mean, so we actually we work with all of these groups and they never actually pay us anything, but we're not pro bono. We're working on contingency because all these consumer protection statutes have legal fees provisions that if we win, you know, then we're entitled to our hourly rates for all of the time that we put into the case. And part of the deal that we have with the nonprofits is as part of the settlement negotiations, we're able to negotiate a fee for ourselves so that we can, you know, continue doing the work. So yeah, in theory it should be self-sustaining. Again, it's such a new area of law. There would be no rigorous way of telling somebody the expected value. I mean, we could give a very speculative answer on the expected value of one of these cases and how much I could expect to make. But like, so I can tell you I've certainly racked up hundreds of thousands of dollars in fees since I've started working on these cases, and maybe I'll win, one out of every 4 of these cases. I mean, who knows? It's just so hard. It's so hard to say. I think I'm going to win all of the cases, but we'll see. But yeah, in theory, it could be self-sustaining, and the funding system that I have set up is interesting. I'd definitely be happy to chat with people in more detail about this. But basically, I'm getting paid like a below market rate for a private litigator, about what you would be paid if you were at a nonprofit. But the benefit is that if I win, then after I reimburse the amount of grants that I got from the donors to a fiscal sponsor, which is a 501c3 that basically houses this fellowship that I created. After I reimburse them, then I could collect the excess. So that's how it works. And the thought is, I can reimburse the fellowship fee, the fellowship fund. They can hire me another year. They can hire you next year. So in theory, yeah.
That was actually my question.
Have you won every case?
I've never lost a case.
Yeah.
I haven't won one yet, but I haven't lost one either.
But you've always been able to settle in your favor.
Maybe in others, like, are you happy with the settlements that you've gotten?
So all the cases that I've really poured a lot of time into, and all the animal cases are still in litigation.
Oh.
So
okay.
I don't even. I mean, these.
Oh, I thought you had settled some.
So my firm has.
Oh.
And right before I joined, they settled this case against an egg company, which is the only case that has really concluded of our animal cases, and we have half a dozen other cases that are just still in the middle of litigation in various stages. I mean, the most advanced of any of our cases is our case against Hormel Foods, which is we're supposed to get a summary judgment decision like this week. Who knows if we're actually going to get one? But that's the most. That would be. I mean, I think there's maybe like one other case that's ever gotten that far in this space.
So it's very new then.
Yeah, it's just very. It's all very. It's really hard to say. Still think we're in it.
So I'm just curious, you mentioned at the beginning that like when you first started being vegan, you were looking for like farms where it was sufficiently humane such that you could buy from them anyway. Is the like settlement, the deal on the case that your firm recently settled with like the egg company good enough such that you would purchase eggs from that company now?
I mean, I can't answer that.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, we can talk about that afterwards. Yeah, but I mean, I guess I could just say as a general matter, like, there is no way to economically produce animal products in a way that's humane. I feel very confident that that's the case. Certainly that I think meets my standards and most people I know standards of like how animals should be treated. There's just no way it could be produced at a profitable rate without like, yeah, just one example I think that makes that I like to point out to people is like, I have chickens, I live with chickens who are rescued. And if a chicken gets sick, we bring them to the vet because we're not monsters. And when you bring them to the vet because they get sick, because you're a reasonable person, the vet bill is going to cost hundreds of dollars. Chickens get sick. That is just a fact of life. So if you believe that animals deserve veterinary care, then I think just by that alone, I mean, it's just not going to ever be economically feasible to raise animals for people to eat their body or their eggs or their milk. So that's my general thought.
I guess I have another question. So I'm interested in like this whole like fact-finding function that your litigation serves, right? So you said that you rely partially on like third parties or your own private investigations, but also on stuff you learn from discovery. So I have a couple questions about that. So one, like, what do you think like the breakdown is between how important those are to you? And then secondly, like, if you know, yeah, as an animal advocate, I mostly still rely on like MFA or like private investigations from MFA or whatever. Do you like ever foresee a day where like a lot of the like discovery that you're doing will become public?
Yeah, And so that actually is a good question. That it's just we learn all this stuff internally, but then we're kind of limited as to what we could do with it because these companies just claim that everything is highly confidential, even if it literally has no bearing on their business practices. I mean, like, why should a picture of a decapitated chicken, if everybody is using the same standard, what is this? How could this possibly be highly confidential? But they've designated it as such, and then to actually get it into a court filing, I mean that you have to create some kind of legal issue that even requires it to get into to even litigate the question of whether it should be confidential or not, or whether it should be sealed. And even then, I mean, we're facing this right now with our summary judgment motion. In theory, if we lose on summary judgment, the judge decides maybe we lose on standing, and she didn't need to look at any of the facts to determine any of the facts of the production practice to determine whether we had standing or not. All of that information could just go back, under it will never be unsealed. That being said, even in this case, I mean, when we've developed such a large volume of documents that there's some stuff that is already public just because because the other side just didn't designate everything. In particular, we had you create. Does everyone know what a statement of undisputed material facts is? I mean, just briefly, it's the judge is deciding basically whether, and on summary judgment, whether there's any kind of material dispute of fact in the case, and so the parties write down, they make a list of all the facts that they allege, or there's no possible reasonable dispute based on this. And in our Hormel case, Hormel responded to our long list, basically saying this is true, this isn't true, and adding a lot of detail along the way. And a lot of that I think is all public, or no, it's not all public. A lot of it was not redacted, and so there's a lot of it that's already in the public record. But yeah, it's not as easy as getting the information. There's no direct connection to getting and making it public. But over time, it's like there are lots of things that we learned through discovery. Like we learned the existence of a document that the government creates that monitors for antibiotic-resistant pathogens that are detected in slaughterhouses. No one had ever seen this document before. It had never been FOIA'd before. No one knew that it existed. No one even knew the government was doing this, really, with this level of granularity. And we learned about it through the litigation, and then we FOIA'd for every one that they've ever done. And now we have those documents, and soon they're going to become public. And so there are things like that, in theory, as we learn more about what's out there, we will be able to, we'll have to rely less on the industry. Yeah. Although the industry, of course, will fight back. Who knows, after we make these public, the industry might decide to push back and make sure that no one can ever get these kind of documents again. But yeah, it's a fight, but we are getting it out there, and I think it's going to, a lot could happen in the next few months with our Hormel case, where a lot of these documents become public.
I guess my question is, besides maybe eating vegan or coming and working for you, what can we as law students or others do if you were quarterbacking this offensive against the industry? Where would the resources best be deployed, in other words?
I mean, there are so many things. I mean, I don't even know where to begin. I mean, the legislative work that you're talking about with like the fur ban, I mean, there's so much legislative work that can be done. There's so many super egregious practices I just think are ripe for, activism. Like, just to take one, and not just at the local level or the state level, but even within like a powerful institution like Harvard Law School. Like, I think there's a lot you could do to push the school. I mean, maybe I'm overly optimistic here, but at least within my little Center for Human Rights and Global Justice at NYU where I worked, like, by the time I left, they had a vegetarian food policy because I forced that discussion, and it happened. It's not to say that a vegetarian food policy is necessarily feasible at the level of Harvard, but like, I don't know, take some of the things that we talked about. I mean, like, should Harvard have a policy where it doesn't purchase any meat from a slaughter plant where multi-drug resistant, pathogens resistant to critical antibiotics, were detected? I mean, would that be a policy that we could push for? I mean,
they're actually working on that now. The business school is about to announce that.
Okay, so I am apparently I can see the future. But yeah, there are certain things that are just so egregious. They're like cutting piglets' testicles off without painkillers. Like, how do we allow these fancy, Harvard law people or any, legislators, how do we let anybody to walk around this earth and with this with any kind without shame of the fact that they are buying products of just like unequivocal animal torture, like piglets having their testicles cut off without painkillers? Like, why does a school why do they purchase products that they know come from facilities that use these practices? And they might say they don't know, in which case it's like, let's get these companies, or let's have institutions like this, and at a minimum, they should ask these questions and make the information public. And so, like, another thing that we've seen through the litigation is, Berkeley has like a food policy apparently where they ask these companies about certain of their animal welfare practices. They don't tell anybody about what they learned from all these companies, but like, we should get that information, and we should also, require at a minimum these schools should know whether their suppliers use gestation crates or whatever else it is. I think we could actually push these schools to stop doing it. I like to believe that that's possible, but at a minimum, they should be asking that information, and we should be getting that from people. So I don't know. I could go on and on. I mean, there's so many campaigns that are possible, but there's a lot of just general, if you're creative, there's a lot of institutions that you could change, and a lot of different campaigns that I think are worthwhile. And as I was saying before, I mean, the work that we do is really not rocket science. Like, I could sit down with you in an afternoon and show you how to basically build a false advertising action against somebody. There's just so many. If you just are really dedicated and obsessed with this, you can really do a lot. I don't know if that's a helpful answer.
So we're at the hour. Chris, this is being recorded for ALPP, but